Alrighty, we're going to get going with this panel. I'm Suzanne Gallagher. I'm an associate professor of public health at Plymouth State University. This panel is the intersection of public health and climate change, environmental sustainability. We have 3 panelists and 3 students. I'm going to introduce the panelists. We first have Dr. Aruna Muthukumar, who is a doctor and also part of the New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action. She is part of the Communication and Education Committee, or subcommittee, and she also is a critical care fellow at Dartmouth and has participated in a lot of climate conferences around the world. Next, we have Kaylee Smolin, who is an MD, PhD student at Dartmouth and also co-founder of the Medical Students for Sustainable Future, which is a national organization, and the Dartmouth chapter started in 2020 because of Kaylee. And then, I need to flip my paper. We have Dr. Charles Driscoll, who is a professor of environmental engineering and also part of the Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest, board member of that, of the forest, as well as a scientist working at the forest. And so with that, they each get 4 minutes, and I'm going to start with Dr. Aruna.
Thank you, Suzanne. Does it matter which side of the stage I stand? Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Aruna. I'm a critical care fellow at Dartmouth. I started engaging in climate action in my last year of med school, and since then I've been writing op-eds and occasionally speaking at conferences. But the one thing that I've been consistently doing is trying to learn and teach myself and my patients about how climate affects their health. I will be representing the New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action today. When you think about it, the Venn diagram of people on this planet, the people who are affected by climate change, and the people who should do something about it are 3 completely overlapping circles. And I have a particularly vested interest in this because of my patients. As a critical care doc, I have seen patients battling severe debility and death, and often climate is a direct or indirect cause of their condition. If I were to go into how climate affects health very briefly, I like to think about it as organ systems, which is what we do in the ICU. When you think of respiratory illnesses, it is very well known that air pollutants cause asthma exacerbations. Where I trained in residency in the Bronx, I have seen a disproportionately high number of Black men and women affected by air pollution, resulting in severe asthma, resulting in them getting admitted to the ICU. You think of tick-borne illnesses, which is a problem in our region right here. We're increasingly seeing that there's co-infections by multiple different parasites and bacteria from a single tick bite. Just a couple months ago, my team and I cared for a patient who came in with 3 different organisms from a single tick bite, which has not been reported before. And his condition got so severe that he developed an autoimmune reaction to that and then lost motor control in both his legs. And that's something that we're increasingly seeing as mutated forms of disease as a result of climate change. When you think about it in a macroscopic level, climate-causing natural disasters and their result in morbidity and mortality, the result in mental illnesses that occur from being a climate refugee, these are serious problems. I don't think that I have much time with you, but I do want to talk to the students after this on some of my experiences and how we can move forward on this path of climate revolution. But when I think about the things that I want to leave you with, there are a few suggestions or ideas that come to my mind, which is 1, always try to actively integrate climate into your clinical practice when you're thinking about why your patients are presenting with your illnesses. When you're thinking about that diagnosis, thinking about how climate has played into this will have a significant impact in the way that you practice medicine, but also care for your patients. The other thing that I want to say is use your voice to carry the stories of your patients going forward. And I think the last thing would be never underestimate your role in this climate revolution. Vote keeping climate in mind and always act keeping climate in mind. Thank you.
I think you're next. Right. Yeah. Kaylee, want to go?
Hi, everybody. My name is Kaylee. I am an MD PhD student at Dartmouth, which pretty much makes me a professional student, like most of you. I'm in my 7th year of the program, and I did come straight from undergrad, so I've never taken a break in my entire life. I spend my day studying protein phosphorylation inside of cells, which is a fancy way of saying how cells communicate with each other. And a lot of people are like, okay, well, why are you so passionate about climate change then? Like, don't you want to commit yourself to that cause? And I think I realized this basically my entire life, but when I was in COVID trying to do all of the science work, I think it became very apparent that we have an issue. One, when I couldn't get any supplies because of the supply chain issues. And so I am reliant on sterile single-use equipment in order to do a whole bunch of sterile experiments. And I fill a 5-gallon bucket of plastic waste at least every week with doing science experiments. And then that waste all goes into an autoclave, which uses around 3,000 gallons of water to sterilize the waste before it goes to the municipal trash. And sometimes it's biohazard waste that ends up going into our water. And a lot of people in the lab are like, oh, I don't know, this is a bottle full of methanol. I'll just rinse it out and put it down the sink. Methanol is very dangerous. And when I was watching all of this happening, I realized that as a laboratory scientist and a future doctor, I had to do it better, which then made me want to found Medical Students for a Sustainable Future, which is a national organization. And we've been around since 2020 on the Dartmouth campus and do a variety of things, from advocating for curricular change to try and get planetary health incorporated into the curriculum, and doing research projects at the hospital. So we recently did a waste audit in endoscopy in order to better understand what is the waste that comes from using a colonoscopy. And it really takes having key players in the hospital that allow me to collaborate with them, such as some people who are in the audience today. And I just think that healthcare sustainability and planetary health are almost different. I think of healthcare sustainability and how can we actually practice medicine and do science in a way that is better for our planet. Hospitals are responsible for 8 to 10% of all carbon emissions in the United States, which is larger than most sectors. And an annual hospital uses 2.6 times the energy of any other commercial sector. And a lot of people are like, well, why? And I think hospitals never turn off. And if we just acknowledge that patients are attached to monitors 24/7, the lights are on, and they're definitely energy-intensive spaces. And so questioning how can we do that better? Is the procedure absolutely necessary? When you think about getting a colonoscopy that generates 2.6 kilograms of waste, is that procedure something that we actually have to do? And so these are questions that motivate me in order to better advocate for a planet where we're not sending people to the intensive care unit to see Dr. Aruna who are having things like asthma exacerbations, or my partner who had Lyme disease, and is something that I think I discredited prior to watching what that actually looks like, and spending an entire day in the ER getting 4 liters of fluid and a spinal tap and realizing that's actually really serious. And so as somebody who really wants to do research, I think I see myself pivoting towards a space that is more planetary health focused. And I'm happy to, as students, answer any questions about what that looks like as you're thinking about pursuing future careers.
And finally, Dr. Driscoll.
Well, good morning, and good to see you all, although it's really hard to see people. So I'm very happy to participate in this session. I'm Charlie Driscoll. I'm a professor of environmental engineering at Syracuse University. You may wonder what's somebody from Syracuse doing at an event in New Hampshire, but I do have a local connection. So I work at the Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest. I've been a researcher there for a number of years, and I'm on the board of the Hubbard Brook Research Foundation. So I was invited to do this session by Anthea. You know, I'm really excited about this session. I think people generally don't understand that there's a very strong linkage between climate change and public health. So we all have sort of a vested interest in climate change. It's going to really help our health portfolio in this country. And so you might ask the question, why is that? Well, for fossil fuels, when they're emitted, they emit carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas, methane, also a greenhouse gas. But there are also air pollutants that are associated with this, things like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides, volatile organic carbon, and those influence air quality, and there are health impacts associated with that. So those chemicals are transformed into the atmosphere and form other chemicals that are known as fine particulate matter and ozone. And those are really the two most prominent health impacts in terms of air pollution. And so if we reduce carbon dioxide emissions, if we decarbonize, we're not only going to have climate benefits, but we're going to have very significant health benefits. And those health benefits are manifested locally, where CO2 is a global issue, a global pollutant. Sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, volatile organic carbons will result in improvements in local and regional air quality, and there will be huge health benefits associated with that. So I think people don't really understand this, but there is going to be tremendous benefits as we decarbonize, and I look forward to this panel and these questions.
So now we're going to turn it over to the students. We'll start with you, Ben, and you want to pay attention to the time.
Yeah, awesome. Hello, Aruna. This is a question for you. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. And I'll be asking about the connection between climate, health, and inequality. So I'm Ben. I'm a first-year student from Portland, Oregon, studying at Dartmouth College. And I care about climate action because I view climate change as an opportunity to transform our society, to address its root cause, a twin crisis of environmental and human exploitation. Naomi Klein writes, "Climate change is a powerful message spoken in the language of fires, floods, droughts, and extinction, that we need a new way of sharing this planet." In Portland, we've experienced extreme heat as a result of the fossil fuel-caused climate crisis. Temperatures reached over 120 degrees in June of 2021, killing over 100 people. Most were low-income or unhoused. They were living in the streets, baked by the sun, or stuck in sweltering apartments without access to AC. And this fall, I conducted research with Dartmouth's Energy Justice Clinic and noticed how energy insecurity can also negatively impact health. I spoke to homeowners who faced health concerns from energy insecurity, mobile homeowners who lacked insulation, had poor roofs, were at higher risk from fossil fuel exacerbated extreme rain, flooding, heat waves, and freezes. According to the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health, quote, "Climate change is harming Americans today, with people of color and communities living in poverty experiencing greater harm," end quote. You mentioned your work specifically in the Bronx, and my question for you is, does inequality shape climate-related public health impacts? Also, how can policymakers and physicians address climate and public health while centering justice?
You have 3 minutes.
Ben, thank you so much for that question. The way that I think about social justice and climate health is that it increases your risk factors. It definitely is a risk factor having adverse impacts from the climate crisis, and also affects the way that you can access the therapy that you need or the solutions that you need. And to give you an example of a patient that I cared for, and this is a story that I always carry with me, 24-year-old gentleman, he walked into the ED, he was not able to breathe, severe asthma, was admitted to the ICU, got put on a ventilator to help him breathe, and then failed maximal support, was placed on advanced life support called ECMO, and then died within 4 days of coming into the hospital, just because he lives in a neighborhood that had a high level of smog, and he wasn't able to afford his rescue inhalers. And this is an example of how climate injustice is so pervasive that it affects not just your risk factors for having disease, but also your access to healthcare and everything down the line. To give you another example, we talk about heat islands and how heat exhaustion and heat stroke is a problem, and the people who are most affected are construction workers whose contribution to the climate crisis is about a fraction of, and just as much as everybody else, but they're the ones bearing the brunt of the disease, coming into ERs with acute renal failure and heat strokes and things like that. You also talked about climate refugees, and that's an excellent example of how social injustices play into all of this. When I think about how physicians and physician advocates and policymakers can acknowledge this, I think the most important thing would be to recognize that there are differences in the levels of care that people who are marginalized receive, and that they need additional focus, and that it is important to prioritize their health and their access to healthcare when we're making policies, and also educate them on how to obtain this access to healthcare, because educating them is empowering them and giving them the means that they need to get themselves through this, which for whatever reason that it might be, they might not actually be able to make that connection between how their health is impacted by climate. And so empowering them to be able to do that would be another step forward through education. Thank you.
All right, Dante, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you, Kaylee, for answering our questions. This is a question for you about medical waste and sustainability in the medical industry. So I'm Dante Castellano, a high school senior at Nashua High School South and a fellow on the 350 New Hampshire youth team. I'm a big believer in reducing waste as much as possible to prevent landfills from growing so much, as obviously methane emissions from the landfills are a big problem, and I also just hate seeing good things go to waste. This is why I compost at home and recycle as much as possible, yet I'll be the first one to admit that I still waste way more than I should. I fear the day when the landfill at the local dump is full or used. What happens from there? Will more land be repurposed to store our garbage? Eventually, we're going to run out of space. So, during the COVID-19 pandemic, I couldn't help but realize how much waste medical masks and other equipment create. While I understand sterility is crucial in the healthcare system and world of scientific research, I was wondering, as a medical student, can you think of any feasible ways in which the medical and research industry could attempt to reduce their waste without compromising the health and safety of others? I know you touched on this a little bit. And additionally, do you feel that sustainability is a topic that is adequately covered as a medical student at Dartmouth?
You have 3 minutes to answer. Sit down.
Thank you for that question, Dante. I'm just going to stay seated. So, yes, there are feasible ways that the healthcare industry can reduce waste. And if we just even look from an international versus United States, in the US, we just use far more. We have the most expensive healthcare system. I think one thing that in doing things like the waste audit at the endoscopy unit and realizing just like how much waste is produced, like I could fill this entire stage up to my shoulders in trash from 1 week of doing colonoscopies at DHMC alone, and that's very scary. And so we were looking at different ways that we could divert that waste. So putting things from municipal into recycling, talking with our waste distributor to try and figure out what is actually recyclable for us at our hospital, and how do you get things out of biohazard bags so that they don't actually have to go to incineration, which is driven to New Jersey. And so these are different things that we've been thinking about. And I think like when I want to say, well, look at all of these like health impacts, like water pollution, air pollution, those didn't get as much administrative support as when I said, if we reduce this single plastic item, we'll save the department $11,000 a year. And that was interesting to me. And I didn't think that as someone pursuing an MD PhD, I would have to try and become fluent in finances. And so that's been an interesting observation. And so I think we can reduce waste, and it can come from more education on how to actually dispose of things appropriately, and also how to make recommendations to manufacturers. And that's one thing that we've been doing. So, like, is this equipment actually necessary, is a big thing. And to answer your second question, is healthcare sustainability covered enough in the curriculum? No, it's not. So curriculum advocacy is something that we've been working on. Professors are far more inclined to incorporate aspects of planetary health, such as talking about vector-borne diseases are becoming more prevalent where we live. Tick-borne illness is a problem, but less so, I think, than covering healthcare sustainability. So as doctors, asking yourself questions like, does my patient actually need this procedure? What is a lower utilization procedure that we could recommend? Even when you are doing a procedure, do I need to open this next sterile packet? A lot of medical devices come in combination packs, and you might use 1 out of 5 pieces, and then the rest of them go into the trash because we don't have a good way of repurposing them in the United States because there are not adequate studies with how to prevent things like infection. And so having more people focused on, are infection rates actually different if we have less gowning protocols, is something that I think we could do better at. There's been studies that compare the same procedure in the US versus like internationally. And so, for example, like cataract surgery requires like 1/8 of the waste in India, and they have very similar outcomes. And so those are things I think that we can do better. Yep.
All right, Harper, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Driscoll, for sharing your time and expertise with us today. This is a question about the fossil fuel industry and a green transition. My name is Harper Richardson, and I was raised in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and Irvine, California. I'm a freshman at Dartmouth College, and I plan to study history and public policy. On campus, I'm an activist with Fossil Free Dartmouth, an organization that advocates for the disassociation from the fossil fuel industry, and we call for a fossil-free research policy for the college, meaning the rejection of future donations from the fossil fuel industry due to the implications of greenwashing and sponsorship bias. And while advocating on campus, we have faced opposition from those who say we could be alienating a key player in a green transition, the fossil fuel industry, if they are willing to use their monetary and technical resources to assist. And as a scientist and environmental engineer who understands the need for decarbonization of the electricity sector and who has conducted research on the impacts of petrochemicals on the environment, including air pollution, what role do you believe the fossil fuel industry should play in our necessary transition to renewable energy, given their history of disinformation, lobbying, and disregard for environmental justice? And how can we hold the fossil fuel industry accountable for the disproportionate negative health impacts of air pollution on vulnerable populations? Thank you.
All right, Dr. Driscoll, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, that's quite a question to unpack. But I have to say, these have been really terrific questions. For kudos to you guys for coming up with this. To address Harper's question, I want to sort of expand on some of the things I was talking about in my introductory remarks. Some of you were here early in the program, and my colleague Gene Likens talked about his work at Hubbard Brook and the discovery of acid rain and the impacts. And so acid rain, the origins of acid rain are those same chemicals that I talked about, sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides, which have impacted soil and water, and that we've seen the impacts in New Hampshire. So the impacts are not only human health, but they're also ecosystem health as well. So I think that's important for people to realize. And getting back to the human health, if we think about how do these chemicals, fine particulate matter, ozone, impact us? Well, they're linked to a number of problems in terms of health problems. They're linked to respiratory ailments. They're linked to cardiovascular problems. They're linked to neurological problems. They're linked to cancers. They're linked to a whole host of maladies. They exacerbate hospital visits. They exacerbate asthma attacks. They greatly accelerate premature mortalities. So globally, there's some uncertainty in this, but it's somewhere between 4.5 and 6 million people per year die prematurely because of exposure to fine particulate matter and ozone. And in the U.S., the values have improved tremendously, but they're still on the order of 50,000 to 100,000 people per year who die prematurely because of these air pollutants. So if we can decarbonize, and we talked about this being a sort of a local issue, that would be realized instantaneously. So we would get those benefits as soon as they happen, and that is huge in terms of the overall impacts. And if we think about this from a cost-benefit analysis, if you would sum up all those health benefits, they would greatly exceed the costs of decarbonizing the entire economy. The benefits are just massive, and people need to realize this. And so just a little bit at the end, in terms of the second part of your question, Harper, you talked about what are the communities that are impacted. And really, communities that are economically disadvantaged, minority communities are overwhelmingly exposed to greater levels of these chemicals, fine particulate and ozone, than the community as a whole. I mean, it's mostly in the eastern U.S., it's most severe in urban areas, it's most severe in low-income areas. And so those communities are feeling the impacts to a greater extent and would receive the benefits if we were able to decarbonize. So I hope that addresses, at least to a limited extent, your good question. So thank you very much.
Well, that concludes this panel, and I hope that those of you in the audience have an opportunity to engage with our panel members throughout the rest of the day. And I think we're going to have a stage transition and a short break. So thanks.